Modern life moves fast. Screens refresh endlessly, opinions collide without pause, and the pressure to be seen, heard, and validated quietly follows you everywhere. Social media promises connection, yet often leaves a sense of inner fatigue. The mind becomes crowded, emotions pile up, and beneath it all, a subtle tension grows. It feels as if something inside is constantly trying to prove its worth, to stay ahead, to avoid falling behind. What if that inner struggle is not caused by the world outside, but by the way the self clings to control and recognition? What if the very force we believe gives us strength is also the source of our restlessness? Stoic philosophy is an ancient wisdom shaped by hardship and deep reflection on human nature. It invites you to understand the ego rather than feed it. As its grip softens, mental clarity emerges. Noise fades, thought steadies, and inner peace becomes a lived experience in an uncertain world. Modern life places constant demands on your attention, your identity, and your sense of worth. Every day brings new measurements of success, new comparisons, and new expectations. Yet beneath deadlines, notifications, and responsibilities, there's a quieter struggle taking place. It is not a battle against circumstances, but against the inner voice that wants recognition, control, and certainty. This is the battlefield of the ego, and it exists within every human being. The ego is not inherently harmful. It helps form identity, protects boundaries, and gives structure to the self. But when left unchecked, it begins to dominate perception. It insists on being right, fears being overlooked, and resists anything that threatens its image. Over time, this constant vigilance becomes exhausting. Anxiety grows not because life is difficult, but because the ego demands that life conform to its expectations. Stoic philosophy emerged from observing this tension long before modern psychology gave it language. In ancient cities shaped by war, political instability, and unpredictable fate, Stoic thinkers noticed that suffering often came not from events themselves, but from how the mind interpreted them. The ego, always seeking control, reacted to uncertainty with fear and frustration. The Stoic response was not suppression, but understanding. Rather than promising happiness through external achievement, Stoicism pointed inward. It suggested that strength is not found in dominance or validation, but in inner stability. This idea feels countercultural today, where success is often equated with visibility and affirmation. Yet the ancient Stoics understood something timeless. When peace depends on external approval, it becomes fragile. When peace is rooted internally, it becomes resilient. From here, we turn to the nature of inner conflict itself. The ego thrives on comparison. It measures success against others and interprets disagreement as threat. In this way, it transforms neutral events into personal challenges. A delayed response becomes rejection. Criticism becomes an attack. Uncertainty becomes danger. The mind stays alert, constantly preparing to defend an identity that feels perpetually at risk. Stoic philosophy invites you to pause within this process. It encourages awareness of the moment when the ego takes control of interpretation. Instead of reacting automatically, Stoicism asks you to observe. This observation is not passive resignation. It is an active form of clarity. By seeing how the ego operates, its urgency begins to loosen. What once felt personal begins to feel instructive. There is a quiet power in realizing that not every thought deserves agreement. Not every emotional reaction needs immediate expression. Stoicism does not deny emotion, but it questions its authority. It teaches that the mind can choose how to relate to its impulses. In doing so, it weakens the ego's grip without attempting to destroy the self. Now imagine how radical this idea was in its time. Ancient societies valued honor, reputation, and public status deeply. Yet Stoic thinkers spoke of dignity that could not be taken away by exile, poverty, or loss. They observed that when identity becomes fused with outcomes, the self becomes vulnerable to forces beyond its control. By separating worth from circumstance, they offered a form of freedom that required no permission from the world. This is why Stoic philosophy continues to endure across centuries of upheaval. Empires fell, belief systems shifted, and technologies transformed human interaction. Yet the inner struggle remained unchanged. The ego still sought certainty in an uncertain world. Stoicism survived because it addressed something universal, the human tendency to suffer from its own interpretations. There is also an archaeological dimension to this endurance. Stoic ideas were preserved not in monuments or temples, but in personal writings, reflections, and teachings passed quietly through generations. This mirrors the philosophy itself. Stoicism does not announce itself loudly. It works beneath the surface, shaping character rather than spectacle. Its survival is a reminder that ideas grounded in human nature outlast trends built on novelty. But there is another layer worth considering. Letting go of the ego often sounds like loss. Many fear that without it, motivation will disappear or identity will dissolve. Stoicism challenges this fear gently. It suggests that what falls away is not purpose, but unnecessary struggle. What remains is clarity. When the ego stops demanding constant validation, energy becomes available for meaningful action. This reframing changes how challenges are experienced. Failure no longer threatens identity. Success no longer defines worth. Both become events rather than verdicts. The mind regains space to think clearly, to act deliberately, and to rest without guilt. In this space, emotional resilience begins to form. Educational videos exploring Stoic philosophy often focus on techniques and rules, but at its heart, Stoicism is an invitation to self-understanding. It asks why the mind reacts as it does and whether those reactions serve long-term well-being. It is not a system of control, but a practice of discernment. Through this lens, the ego is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a pattern to be understood. As this understanding slowly deepens, a quiet transformation begins to unfold. The constant urgency to defend opinions and protect identity gradually fades. The need to impress others or prove personal worth loses its intensity. Attention moves away from appearance and reputation, settling instead on how life is actually lived from moment to moment. This shift is not loud or dramatic, yet its impact is profound. Daily experiences feel less tense and less crowded. The mind becomes a calmer place where gentle awareness replaces endless inner commentary, so the reflective questions remain. Why has this ancient wisdom endured when so many philosophies have faded? What does it reveal about the human condition that remains unchanged despite progress? And perhaps most importantly, is releasing the ego truly a loss, or is it the beginning of a quieter, clearer freedom? These questions are not meant to be resolved all at once. Stoic philosophy never forces insight or demands immediate answers. Instead, it encouraged patience, allowing understanding to unfold slowly through reflection, awareness, and lived experience. Clarity grows with time, not urgency. As this process continues, attention naturally shifts from simply noticing the inner struggle to exploring what gives rise to it. From that point, the path turns inward, guiding awareness toward a deeper understanding of control and where true power truly resides. To understand why Stoic philosophy has the power to transform the ego, it helps to return to the world in which it was born. Ancient societies lived with a constant awareness of uncertainty. Wars reshaped borders overnight. Disease arrived without warning. Lives were shortened not by choice, but by fate. In such an environment, philosophy was not an abstract exercise. It was a tool for survival with dignity. People did not turn to Stoicism to feel superior or intellectually entertained. They turned to it because life was fragile, and they needed a way to remain steady when everything familiar could be taken away. Control, as the Stoics observed, was often an illusion. Those who tried to dominate circumstances suffered deeply when the world refused to cooperate. Those who learned to understand the limits of control suffered less, even when loss was unavoidable. From here, we begin to see the core insight that defines Stoic wisdom. The philosophy did not aim to control the world, society, or other people. Instead, it helped individuals clearly distinguish between what was within their power and what was not. This distinction became a compass. It guided thought, behavior, and emotional response. When confusion arose, the question was simple: is this within my control, or is it not? This idea was radical because it challenged the ego directly. The ego wants influence over outcomes. It wants certainty, recognition, and protection from pain. Stoicism offered none of these guarantees. What it offered instead was clarity. By accepting that external events are largely uncontrollable, the mind could redirect its energy toward what truly belongs to it: judgment and choice. In this sense, Stoicism was never passive. It did not teach resignation or withdrawal from life. It taught precision. It encouraged action where action was meaningful and restraint where struggle was futile. This balance reduced inner conflict. The ego no longer needed to exhaust itself trying to manage the uncontrollable. There is a striking contrast between this ancient insight and modern life. Today, technology creates the impression that everything can be optimized, predicted, or managed. When reality resists, frustration grows. The ego interprets resistance as failure. Stoic philosophy reminds us that frustration often comes from misplaced expectations rather than genuine obstacles. Ancient thinkers developed these ideas through lived experience, not theoretical comfort. One of them began life as a slave, observing how little control people truly had over external circumstances. Another ruled an empire, yet remained acutely aware of impermanence. Despite their vastly different positions, they arrived at the same conclusion: inner freedom depends on understanding control. The perspective of Epictetus centered on the idea that ownership begins and ends with the mind. External possessions, reputation, and even physical health were subject to forces beyond personal command. What remained consistent was the ability to choose how one responded. This was not denial of suffering, but an acknowledgement that suffering becomes unbearable when layered with resistance and resentment. Marcus Aurelius, despite immense authority, continually reminded himself of how fleeting power and admiration were. His reflections did not arise from weakness, but from clarity. He understood that attaching identity to status only deepened vulnerability. By returning attention to character and intention, he preserved mental stability in the midst of responsibility and pressure. When Stoic understanding is viewed alongside Eastern traditions, a deeper pattern begins to reveal itself. Teachings associated with Lao Tzu and Buddhist thought also point toward the quiet release of rigid self-attachment. Despite emerging from different cultures and histories, these traditions observe the same inner struggle. They recognize that much of human suffering arises from the ego's insistence on shaping reality to fit its expectations, rather than meeting life as it unfolds. Across these philosophies, peace is not described as something to be achieved through effort or domination. Instead, it emerges naturally when the mind stops clinging to control. By loosening the need to manage every outcome, awareness becomes more flexible and compassionate. Reality is no longer treated as an obstacle to overcome, but as a process to move with. In this alignment, inner freedom quietly takes root. This convergence suggests something important. The struggle with control is not cultural or historical. It is human. Across civilizations, thinkers observe the same pattern. When the self insists on mastery over impermanence, distress follows. When the self learns to move with reality rather than against it, clarity appears. Stoicism does not claim that pain can be avoided. Loss, illness, and disappointment remain part of life. What changes is the relationship to them. Instead of asking why suffering happens, Stoic philosophy asks how the mind meets it. This shift is subtle but transformative. It relocates power from circumstance to perception. Archaeological discoveries of ancient writings reveal how personal these reflections were. They were not polished treatises for public admiration. They were private notes, reminders, and meditations. This reinforces the idea that Stoicism was meant to be lived quietly, Its power did not depend on persuasion, but on practice. There is an unexplained mystery in how consistently these ideas resurface during times of crisis. Whenever societies face instability, interest in Stoic philosophy grows again. This pattern suggests that when control feels lost, humans instinctively search for inner anchors. Stoicism survives because it offers one. From this perspective, control becomes less about authority and more about alignment. The Stoic learns to align effort with reality. When energy is spent wisely, emotional turmoil diminishes. The ego relaxes because it no longer feels responsible for managing the universe. This understanding reframes ambition. Goals are still pursued, but without attachment to outcome. Action is taken with care, but without obsession. Success is welcomed, but not worshipped. Failure is acknowledged, but not internalized. Through this balance, mental clarity becomes possible, even in uncertainty. The strength of Stoic philosophy lies here. It does not promise escape from difficulty. It offers a way to meet difficulty without losing oneself. By clarifying the boundaries of control, it dissolves much of the ego's anxiety. What remains is steadiness. As we move forward, the question shifts from understanding control to practicing it. Knowing where power lies is only the beginning. The next step is learning to live this understanding in ordinary moments, where philosophy gently transforms into meaningful daily action. Philosophy reveals its true value only when it moves beyond ideas and enters daily life. Stoic philosophy was never meant to remain in books or lectures. It was shaped in marketplaces, military camps, courts, and quiet moments of reflection. Its purpose was practical, to help ordinary people meet ordinary moments with clarity, restraint, and calm. This is where the ego most often asserts itself, not in dramatic crises, but in subtle, everyday situations. The ego speaks loudly in routine moments. It reacts when plans change, when effort goes unnoticed, when words are misunderstood. These moments seem small, yet they accumulate and shape inner experience. Stoicism recognizes that the quality of a life is built from these details. By applying ancient wisdom to daily practice, the mind slowly relearns how to respond rather than react. From here, the transition from theory to practice begins with attention. Stoicism asks you to notice the exact moment when emotion arises, not to judge it, but to see it clearly. This pause creates space. In that space, the ego loses some of its urgency. The mind regains choice. What once felt automatic becomes optional. In professional life, this shift can be transformative. Work often ties identity to performance and recognition. When effort is rewarded, satisfaction follows. When it is overlooked, frustration appears. Stoic philosophy encourages a different orientation. It places value on intention, preparation, and effort rather than outcome. By focusing on what you can control, the mind becomes steadier. External evaluations lose their power to define self-worth. This does not reduce ambition, it refines it. Goals remain important, but they no longer carry emotional weight that disturbs inner balance. Success is approached with gratitude rather than attachment. Setbacks are met with learning rather than self-blame. Over time, this approach reduces anxiety and improves focus. Work becomes an expression of discipline rather than a test of identity. In relationships, the ego often seeks validation, agreement, and control. Misunderstandings quickly become personal. Stoic practice introduces a pause between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting defensively, attention turns inward. What assumption is being made? What expectation has been violated? This awareness allows empathy to replace impulse. Responding with understanding does not mean suppressing boundaries. It means choosing clarity over conflict. When the ego steps back, listening improves. Conversations become less about winning and more about connection. Over time, relationships grow steadier because they are no longer fueled by emotional volatility. Solitude presents another powerful arena for Stoic practice. Modern culture often treats being alone as absence or failure. Stoic philosophy reframes solitude as opportunity. In quiet moments, without distraction, the mind reveals its habits. Thoughts surface, often driven by ego-based concerns about status, comparison, and future uncertainty. Instead of avoiding this discomfort, Stoicism encouraged gentle observation. Solitude becomes a mirror. By sitting with thoughts rather than escaping them, clarity develops. The ego's patterns become familiar. Familiarity reduces fear. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Daily habits support this transformation. Beginning the day with a few moments of stillness sets the tone. This is not meditation aimed at emptiness, but awareness aimed at orientation. The mind checks in with itself before engaging the world. Intention replaces urgency. Writing also plays a central role in Stoic practice. Recording reflections helps separate thought from identity. When a thought is placed on paper, it loses some authority. Patterns become visible. The distinction between what can be influenced and what cannot becomes clearer. Over time, this practice trains discernment. These habits may appear simple on the surface, yet their influence deepens with time. Clarity rarely arrives as a sudden realization or dramatic breakthrough. Instead, it forms quietly through repetition and consistency. Each small act of restraint creates a subtle shift in perception. Each deliberate choice teaches the mind that it does not need to react immediately. Over time, this steady practice reshapes attention, allowing awareness to replace impulse without force or suppression. As this process continues, the ego's grip weakens naturally. Emotional reactions soften and lose their intensity. Recovery from frustration or disappointment becomes quicker and less draining. The constant background noise of the mind begins to fade, replaced by a sense of steadiness and balance. Thought feels less crowded, and inner space expands. In that space, clarity settles in, not as effort, but as a quiet and lasting presence. There is also an archaeological echo in this simplicity. Ancient Stoics did not rely on elaborate rituals. Their practices were portable, adaptable, and internal. This made the philosophy resilient across time and culture. It could be practiced anywhere, by anyone, regardless of circumstance. Its endurance lies in this accessibility. Unexplained mystery often surrounds why certain ancient practices feel so relevant today. Perhaps it is because human psychology has changed less than technology suggests. The same inner conflicts persist. Stoicism speaks directly to them without distraction. It offers tools rather than promises. Educational content that explores Stoic philosophy often highlights discipline, yet this discipline is not rigid or severe. It is grounded in compassionate clarity rather than self-punishment. The purpose is not to achieve perfection or suppress human nature, but to cultivate alignment between values and behavior. When actions are guided by principles instead of ego-driven impulses, tension within the mind begins to ease. Inner conflict gradually fades, replaced by a steadier sense of direction, where choices feel intentional and life unfolds with greater balance and understanding. As practice continues, the ego begins to loosen naturally. There is no force involved. It fades because it is no longer needed. The mind learns that safety does not depend on constant defense. Confidence becomes quieter. Self-respect grows independent of external conditions. This shift creates space for daily mindfulness. Attention settles into the present moment. Tasks are completed with care. Conversations are approached with patience. Solitude becomes restorative. Life feels less fragmented. Clarity emerges not because life becomes easier, but because perception becomes steadier. The invitation of Stoic philosophy is simple and demanding at once. Apply wisdom where it matters most, in ordinary moments. Each small choice reinforces the next. Over time, the mind becomes a calmer place to live. Clarity continues to deepen, gradually revealing a quiet strength that arises from self-mastery and the steady ability to guide one's own thoughts and responses. As these reflections come together, a quiet pattern begins to emerge. Across centuries, cultures, and disciplines, the same insight returns again and again. From the meditations of Marcus Aurelius to the observations of modern psychology, freedom does not begin with changing circumstances. It begins with understanding how the mind responds to them. Self-mastery in this sense is not control over life, but clarity within it. Marcus Aurelius lived surrounded by power, responsibility, and uncertainty. Yet his private reflections consistently return to a single theme: the mind's ability to choose its response. This was not a philosophical luxury, but a necessity. When external pressures multiply, clarity becomes the only stable ground. By training attention inward, he preserved balance in a world that offered little reassurance. Centuries later, modern psychology would echo this insight in different language. Observations drawn from extreme human experiences revealed the same conclusion. Even when external freedom is limited, inner freedom remains possible. This freedom does not come from denial, but from meaning. When a person understands why they endure, the ego loosens its grip on fear. There is a bridge here between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. Both recognize that suffering intensifies when the mind resists what it cannot change. Both suggest that relief begins when attention shifts from outcome to attitude. This is not passivity. It is an active form of responsibility. The individual becomes accountable for interpretation rather than circumstance. In the modern world, noise rarely fades. Information arrives in endless streams, faster than the mind can absorb or reflect upon. Opinions overlap and collide, each demanding attention and reaction. Comparison becomes constant, quietly shaping self-worth and perception without pause. In such an environment, slowing down can feel uncomfortable, even irresponsible. Stillness may appear like withdrawal from progress, as if stepping back means falling behind in a world that values constant engagement. Stoic philosophy offers a quieter and more deliberate interpretation. Stillness is not an escape from reality, nor a refusal to participate in life. It is an act of resistance against mental fragmentation. By choosing stillness, attention is protected from being scattered. Clarity is preserved. The mind regains coherence, allowing thought to move with intention rather than urgency. In this way, stillness becomes a source of strength, not avoidance. When the ego quiets, perception sharpens. Decisions become simpler because fewer impulses demand attention. Emotional reactions lose their urgency. The mind no longer feels compelled to respond to every stimulus. This creates space. In that space, values regain importance. Action becomes intentional rather than reactive. Self-mastery does not require the removal of emotion or the denial of human feeling. Instead, it begins with understanding where emotions arise and why they take shape. When anger surfaces, it is no longer treated as a command that must be followed, but as a signal inviting reflection. Fear, too, is met with awareness rather than resistance. It is acknowledged calmly, without allowing it to dictate behavior or distort perception. Through this approach, emotions are neither suppressed nor indulged. As this relationship with emotion gradually changes, its intensity begins to soften. Feelings move through the mind more freely instead of becoming fixed or overwhelming. Emotional recovery becomes quicker and less draining. The inner landscape grows more stable, less reactive, and more spacious. In this stability, clarity takes root, allowing awareness to guide action rather than impulse. There is also a cultural dimension to this clarity. Societies that emphasize constant achievement often confuse motion with progress. Stoic wisdom questions this assumption. It suggests that growth can occur in stillness, that strength can be quiet, and that clarity does not require constant assertion. This perspective offers relief to minds overwhelmed by performance. Archaeological traces of Stoic thought reveal how personal this practice was. Writings meant for no audience, reflections carved into moments of solitude, reminders designed to anchor attention. These artifacts reflect a philosophy concerned not with recognition, but with alignment. The goal was not to be admired, but to be steady. There is something almost mysterious about how relevant these insights remain. Despite technological advancement, the human nervous system responds to stress much as it always has. The ego still seeks certainty. The mind still resists uncertainty. Stoicism speaks directly to this unchanged reality, offering guidance without illusion. The practical implication of this wisdom is subtle but powerful. When the ego no longer drives every decision, life feels less urgent. Choices are made from principle rather than pressure. This does not reduce effectiveness, it enhances it. Clarity allows energy to be directed where it matters most. In relationships, this clarity fosters patience. In work, it encourages focus. In solitude, it nurtures insight. The same principle applies across contexts. When reactions are mastered, circumstances lose their power to disturb. This is not because challenges disappear, but because interpretation becomes disciplined. The question then arises naturally: what are you trying to prove? Much of the ego's activity revolves around imagined audiences and anticipated judgments. Stoic philosophy invites a reconsideration. Does this effort align with values, or is it fueled by fear of perception? This inquiry alone can dissolve unnecessary struggle. Living without constant self-justification is liberating. It simplifies life. When actions are guided by intention rather than approval, inner conflict diminishes. Confidence becomes quieter and more durable. Peace emerges not as an achievement, but as a byproduct of alignment. This quiet process reflects the true essence of clarity through self-mastery. It is not dramatic or attention-seeking, and it does not demand recognition. Instead, it unfolds gradually, almost unnoticed, as the mind begins to understand where its real power resides. Rather than trying to control every situation, awareness learns to guide response with patience and intention. In a world that constantly encourages immediate reaction and emotional display, choosing thoughtful restraint becomes a rare form of strength. It allows clarity to grow steadily, creating a calmer inner life grounded in understanding rather than impulse. As these reflections settle, the invitation remains open. Self-mastery is not a destination, but a practice. Each moment offers a choice. Each reaction offers an opportunity for clarity. When the ego softens, awareness deepens. Within that growing awareness, a calmer way of being slowly becomes possible, shaped by steadier perception, intentional response, and a deeper sense of inner balance. Stoic philosophy does not ask you to become detached or emotionless. It simply invites you to live with greater awareness, where the ego is no longer in control, but quietly observed. When the need to react to everything softens, the mind begins to feel lighter. In that lightness, clarity appears. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with it has. Life remains noisy and uncertain, yet Stoicism teaches meeting it without losing yourself, restoring steady thought, intentional action, and peace even in motion. If this educational video offered you a new perspective, take a moment to sit with it. Notice what resonated most deeply. You are welcome to share that reflection in the comments. And if you wish to continue exploring ancient wisdom for modern life, consider subscribing. Peace is quiet, but it is always present when you are ready to listen.